I am joined today by Nick Bambach. I kind of like to sort of view it as I met someone at a party. He's wearing the same suit. Hey, it turns out we have not only the same tailor, we have the same interests on a whole lot of things. There's not a lot of us who are this obsessed on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Would you kind of agree on that?
I don't know if it's obsession as more as just intrigue.
Okay, fair enough.
Because obsession means you'll do anything to but like intrigue is like you're kind of looking at something with one eye open, kind of. You're trying to figure out what is happening, what are they doing.
Well, we'll never figure that out.
Yeah. No, because they're not transparent.
No, they're not transparent, but I want to talk about something that I believe is transparent. We got to talking a little bit more. We've been following each other on social media, I believe, for a while now. Mm-hmm. And you reached out to me to be part of a project that you're doing. And before we I gauge your reaction on this year's Rock and Roll Hall of Fame class, I want to talk to you about the project that you've involved me in, if you can.
Absolutely. So I started a project about 3 or 4 months ago with one of my friends, Darren Hines, who is also a Rock Hall watcher. He and I decided to base a Hall of Fame project, almost like a public history project, using the induction system and methodology of the Baseball Hall of Fame. So instead of how the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, you induct at least 5 and up to 7 each year. And it used to be if you get 50% or more of the votes, you would get inducted. So they could have as many as 8 or 10 or as little as 5 because everyone votes for 5. For our project, we use something similar to the Baseball Hall of Fame where you have to reach a certain percentage to receive induction. Now, it's really interesting how the Baseball Hall of Fame, for example, it is 75% for induction. That's way too much because art is subjective, like music. Like you can't measure it unless you're going by awards or sales. And sometimes the greatest artists of all time have never sold many records, like the Velvet Underground or Leonard Cohen, right, or Patti Smith. Like they're if you went based on that, they would never get inducted, but they have influential, legendary careers. Now, with our induction system, we use something similar, but we changed it from 75 to 50 because 50 was the standard for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame up until probably 7 or 8 years ago. As long as you had 50% of the vote, you were inducted no matter what. And I think that's a fair assessment. And we actually have a voting body of, I think now almost 140. And we get a really good return rate. We get at least probably 70 to 80, which is really good if you think about it. Mm-hmm. And people vote in it every week. And we also use a ballot of 40 nominees each week. And then everyone votes for 15. It was 10 for a while, but then we had to change a few things about it. But now it's you vote for 15 out of 40, and then we kind of move up a week. So now we're up to 1995 starting tomorrow or this coming week.
Yeah, it's always a nice thing to get in my inbox every Friday, my new ballot. So I do enjoy being a part of that. What are we up to? 1995. 1995, yeah. Eventually, I'm going to get Professor Longhair in.
He came close to 1 week, and we were all because one of my friends, Mary, is just really she's from Louisiana and she's just amazing. And she's just a huge proponent for Professor Longhair. And I'm rooting for him and some of the NOLA artists. But yeah, maybe he'll get in. If not, we're starting the Veterans Committee next week. So that's the other important thing that we added too, that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame doesn't have that we think should be implemented is this idea of a Veterans Committee. So starting next week, because in the Baseball Hall of Fame, you only get X amount of years, right? So you get, let's say, 10 years of eligibility window. And then what happens is after your 10 years is up, you get moved to consideration for the Veterans Committee. And instead of it being 40, you get 10, but instead of 15 you vote for 4. So it guarantees at least X a number of inductees, or it should, because you're going to have to vote for 4 for your ballot to count. But that's going to be a separate ballot in the same email.
Okay. So when it's all completed, is there going to be a place where people can sort of take a look at all of this?
Actually, on my site, I do have a working document of the inductees every week that I update. So in case people are like, oh, did we get to, I don't know, Frank Zappa and the Mother's Invention? And you'll be like, yeah, they were inducted in 1992. Mm-hmm.
What's the site that people can find that on?
My website is the Audiovisual Repository. So I took three things I love. My background is in film, so I
Mhm.
had to, and I also have more interest in music as I get older, and I also work as a librarian. So repositories like archives and
Okay.
like collection of materials. So I try to pick something that also fits the three things that I enjoy the most.
Nice. Nice. So the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame just had their, I think, and I just read your latest blog on that. I think you and I are in very much agreement on this. It's probably my favorite class in years.
Yeah, it's a great batch of inductees. Very unexpected because you think like, okay, like they're gonna induct like let's say six, and then maybe there'll be like one or two people
Mhm.
in one of the categories because they never really inducted people every year in the categories. Like early influence, it seemed like every 3 years, and
Right.
musical excellence every few years, and non-performers. It was very consistent in how they went about it. And this year they just went like all in,
Mhm.
and they were just like, you know what, we're inducting six performers and we got seven others in other categories. And it's a great class. It's a very diverse class. It's the most probably demographically and musically diverse class they've ever had, or at least in many years.
What do you think is a testament to that? I mean, Jill, I'm blanking in his name, Joel Sykes, I believe. Who?
John Sykes.
John Sykes. Why don't I want to call him Joel? I'm terrible with names, as we've already established before we went on air. It's a lot of the drinking I do as a Canadian, I suppose. John Sykes has talked about pushing more diversity in that.
Absolutely.
Having said that, as much as I think I don't want to make that assumption for you, I might here anyway. I think a lot of us never really liked the work that John Wenner did, but
Jan Wenner,
John
yes.
Wenner, yeah. Saying that, I mean, a lot of the progression, I'm sure, did occur on his watch of trying to broaden the base of the voting public.
Mhm.
Mr. Sykes is just sort of taking that to a completely different level. I would certainly argue. Jan Wenner, I will also probably argue, is the biggest reason why we're even talking today. It's because the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I thought, was a complete disaster when I first started NotHallOfFame.com 11 years ago.
Mhm.
And every year, the outrage of why didn't so and so get in and how come this one got in. Now, you're still going to get that.
Mhm.
But I'm finding, and I don't know if you feel the same, that it's subsiding year after year as they seem to be righting a few of the wrongs that they have. There's still a lot of work to do, I think, but what's your take on that?
Well, when did you start the website, in like what year?
2009 or 2010. The year
That
that
make
Madonna got in, because the idea came
2000,
from
2008 then.
2008. All right, so I might have launched it in 2009, but the idea came from being at a bar, big shock, and just hearing a bunch of people grumble that Madonna had no business being in the Rock Hall.
Mhm.
And then that week, I just started looking at all the people because I thought Madonna should be in.
Yeah, she's no brainer.
Yeah, to me it was, but a lot of people disagreed, and I think that's a lot for a lot of people who traditionally sort of the Gene Simmons value of what rock and roll is, which is, I guess, if it's got two guitars and a drum set, that's pretty much rock to him. And I dispute that, and apparently the Rock Hall agrees with me. But moving on from that, I looked at all the people who weren't in, and then some of the ones who were, and then started off with a list, and then just expanded it to what I have now. But each year, the outrage seems a little bit less. And this year, I mean, there was obviously there were some people upset, but you're not going to please everybody. But I do think they're so trending in the right direction in who they're putting in. There's still a lot of things I despise.
Well, I think you started the website in 2008 or 2009. That was when it was a little bit more closed off. So they didn't have big classes. Like there were only five performers get inducted from 2005 to 2011. So
Mm.
that actually really hurt the backlog for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame because it's just created more and more like these worthy arts are just never even making a ballot, let alone being
Right.
on the ballot to be considered. And in 2013, you saw the inductions of like Rush, and then you saw like a little bit more of a populist wave that was coming in. So that's when you started seeing more classic rock
Mm-hmm.
get into the mix. And I'll be honest, like I not as big of a classic rock fan, but I think there's absolutely arguments for people that got in, like Kiss or Deep Purple or even Journey. Like, like I'm not saying I'm a huge fan of theirs per se, like actively seek out their music, but they have cases and they were kind of just not, you know, it was just not giving people what they were interested in at that time. And that's the move really also to HBO happened around that time in 2012. Right. So you started seeing like this like shift to, maybe not the most critically acclaimed artists or bands, but super influential and super well-known. I always think, like, to me, a determinant of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, a part of it, I hate to say it, is, are you a household name? I mean, like, you could have all the influence, you could have all the accolades and whatever, and great music, but are you a household name? Like if you ask someone, do you know like Carole King or the Foo Fighters? I think that matters too, in a way, that name recognition.
I'd agree with you. There's a lot of varying criteria. I think the Rock Hall, and I like how you were using the word populist, because they were going a little bit too, what's what I'm sort of looking for, critic centric.
Yes.
And and you mentioned Kiss. Kiss is a band that I'll admit I love, but I never thought Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley, never compared them to Lennon and McCartney, because they weren't. They couldn't do that. Did I have a lot of fun at Kiss concerts? Absolutely. Did it make me want to try to pick up a guitar? Yeah, it did. Did I want to try to copy writing their music? No, because lyrically they weren't very good. But they put on one hell of a show.
And I will say it gave us also, I think, one of the greatest induction speeches ever with Tom Morello inducting Kiss. It's one of, I don't know how long ago you've listened to it, but I always listen to it every 3 or 4 months, because it kind of reminds me of why I'm interested in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Because Tom Morello is like this respected guitarist that is this political revolutionary, but he's also like working with like all these different kind of genres and styles and what not have you. And he's made like the most impassioned case for anyone I've ever heard to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And you can't help but like not dislike Kiss after that. Like, you're like, yeah, I'll get behind Kiss, even if I'm not a fan of their work. And I think that that's the testament, is how much did they mean something to you too personally? Like, did they inspire you to write music or, quit your job and make it in the music industry, or whatever it may be? There's so many factors, but that speech always go back to, because it's so powerful and it's great. And Tom Morello was great too, of course. So
yeah, and a lot of it too is sometimes it's not necessarily how you start, it's where you end up. And Kiss was the starting point for, I think, a lot of musicians of that era. I don't know how much they necessarily took from them, but it made them want to become stars in one facet. And then creatively you morph into something else. So from this, going back to this class, because I really want to do more of a deep dive on that.
Sure.
Again, after reading your blog, again, we have something also in common with Kraftwerk getting inducted this year in a very, I want to say, surprising way, because that's the one of the biggest criticisms I still have is, as we said earlier, the lack of transparencies. I had the chance to talk to a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame voter, and when I asked her how many other voters, she said, I don't know. She doesn't know.
They said it in the press release. There's like 1,200 this year. Yesterday they published it. They said that there were about 1,200 or so voters.
Okay, so that's
and it's been going up every year, because they're trying to diversify by making it more, especially of a younger demographic looking at the thing. But we didn't know for the longest time, because, and then like if people post pictures of their ballots on social media, like some of my friends look for that stuff, you'll see like a number in the bottom right-hand corner, and it'll say like ballot like 1247, let's say. You're like, oh, at least there has to be at least that many ballots. But yeah, Kraftwerk getting in as early influence. Okay, so here's my take that I think. I'm glad they're in. Like, they're one of the biggest snubs, and anyone who disagrees with it, I just don't understand. Like, they're literally giving you something that you want. Maybe it's not how you want it to happen, but it happened, and there's nothing we could do about it. And they should be in. They should have been in like the late 90s when they were, or mid to late 90s when they were first eligible.
Yeah. They've been hovering either at number one or hovering at number one at the top since I started this whole thing. I can't remember if they debuted at number one. I think so. Votes actually came in for them, weren't necessarily the best. The best I've got, the highest vote getters is Jethro Tull by, I don't want to say a wide margin because there's a lot of acts that are over 90%, but last time I checked, they were at 96 point something. But yeah, Kraftwerk is one I'm personally the most happiest about. And then I always wonder, like, why am I so happy? Like, I don't think they care, the remaining members who are still alive.
Not even that. It's just like they failed. It's like LL Cool J. Like they failed with the voters half a dozen times each. And, it's after a while, like, some people I've been reading comments on like social media and whatever, it's just like, oh, it's not the right thing to do. Well, what is the right thing to do? Just keep putting them back on a ballot every year just to get rejected by the voters. And then when you do that for Kraftwerk, you're also hurting the backlog too, because you're not allowing other people to be considered. So for EDM or electronic, you can't get to Daft Punk then. You can't get to these other artists of that genre or style. And it's like, you got them in, and now they're in company with their people that they influence, like Depeche Mode and Nine Inch Nails. And like I said, it opens up a spot and you never have to really think about them again because, most people aren't going to care, Kurt, how they're inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Like you could argue all day and say, I was really upset that Wanda Jackson got an early influence induction, which is kind of strange with the definition that they had, but they updated the definition to reflect not pre-rock anymore, but just a direct influence on rock, right. Which is really interesting that they did that yesterday. And if I would actually take it one step further, like I wrote in my blog, I would actually drop the word early if I was them. Just say influences. That then you'll have anyone who is arguing that Kraftwerk or Gil Scott-Heron shouldn't be in that category. It's an easy fix. You just drop one word, influences, and that's it.
Yeah. And that's really, I think, the key thing, because that was the only criteria that they even mentioned ever at all initially, just for the Rock Hall. It was influence. That was the big key word. So if that is the word we want to hang our hat on, and there's other, and again, it's a very broad definition. Kraftwerk, Gil Scott-Heron. Gil Scott-Heron was a pleasant surprise, though.
I predicted him
nominated.
I predicted him last year. Because the Rock Hall had, in the wake of all the political and social turmoil we've had over the past year, they had that really great exhibit that Waka Anusa, the new Rock Hall curator, had. It's been said all along, and he was featured predominantly. If you go on their website and you look at the exhibit, him and other politically active or socially conscious artists were mentioned. He was mentioned alongside like actual Hall of Famers, and I said, there has to be some correlation there. Like they don't just do that just for nothing either. Not that you want to read too much into something, but you're like, and one of my friends, Michelle, she is also a Rock Hall watcher. She wrote a really wonderful piece on Gil Scott-Heron and why he's worthy. I think last May. And he's absolutely worthy. And it's really fascinating in his induction too, because you're actually honoring someone who had a direct influence on especially hip hop outside the performers category, because for the longest time, you only had one hip hop artist inducted each year, and that was it. And they only stayed in the performance category. Gil Scott-Heron is an early influence. So it's someone outside that genre. So I think that's actually a hugely important induction in many ways.
The one, though, that I'm still befuddled by, not that I don't think he belongs, I do, but this LL Cool J getting in when he was on the vote and then he gets in a different way is very strange to me.
It is strange. I mean, LL's like one of those people where he's like Kraftwerk. He had a half a dozen chances. And there's a very famous story that him and Chic Questlove once said this many years ago, that they came super close one year to induction. Like they just missed it. And to me, if you just miss it, you should just put them in. Like if you're within a few votes, just throw them in. Then you don't ever have to worry about them again. Not, I mean, like if you're super close, not like to rig the process to make it fit whatever narrative you want it to be. Like some people are saying, like, oh, you should just throw in Iron Maiden or the New York Dolls. It's like, well, no, if they didn't get enough votes and like there was nowhere even close to induction, then you can't. But LL Cool J getting music accolades, yeah, it's strange because he had a performing career. It's not like Todd Rundgren. It's really weird how like Todd Rundgren is getting in the performers category, but he arguably had way more impact and influence as a producer. And so like to me, he would have been like the excellent choice for the musical excellence
Right.
category. So it's kind of strange that it turned out the way, but Todd got enough votes. So like what are you supposed to do? Like change it around to make it fit? Like it L clearly didn't get enough votes, I guess.
But they have changed. Yeah, I know. I know what you're saying. Like you don't want to flip that over because like one of the predictions that I made didn't come true. I thought Todd was going to get in, but I thought they were going to find that other method, the way that LL got in. I thought that's what was going to happen.
I actually got all 6 correct.
Yeah, I read that.
I know, it was funny. Like I said Rage 2 because I said Rage and Todd were like 6 and 7, but I'm like, who cares? Like one of them is going to get in. I don't know. And a lot of people kind of were like, not really like sure on Todd. I said he's the only classic rocker. He has to come close. They wouldn't keep putting him on a ballot if he wasn't at least coming close. And he kind of had a clear lane this time.
I did a show just the other day, my weekly Hall of Fame show with Evan Nolan, my partner on that, and he was of the belief, and I'm kind of with him on that one, that LL spot probably should have went to Shaka Khan.
I love Shaka Khan. She's amazing.
Yeah. And mainly because I think they really want her in more, and they're going to keep putting her up. And I'm trying to think of other cases where I've seen an act and where they wanted her in so bad. So, all right, we'll try her as a solo. All right, now we're going to try her with Rufus. And we're going to try her as solo. So they want her in. And that's where I wish the transparency was there. Like, I wish I knew how close she's been, if she's close at all. I suspect not very.
I think it's hard because the Rock Hall of Fame doesn't have transparency. They don't release the votes. That's what we do too in the Rock Hall Reconsider project. We tell you guys, here's the total breakdown, so there's no confusion. We don't release the actual votes because we want people's privacy, of course, and we want people to respect, the process too. And if you want to see your votes, you're more than welcome to. But that's a huge part of it too, is that you don't know how close.
You can release mine. I'm cool with that.
Sure. No. But it's just one of those things where like they clearly want Shaka Khan in. And even in interviews when you talk or listen to former or a really current nominating committee members, she gets the most support out of anyone in the room every year. And it doesn't matter if it's with Rufus, without Rufus, like they want her in. And she's a weird anomaly too, because she's kind of like the missing link between the great soul singers of the 60s with like Aretha Franklin and Gladys Knight and really like Whitney Houston and Janet Jackson. She's like in the middle of that. And like, it's like this impossible figure that you kind of have to honor, because like you could argue, like, I mean, literally in I'm Every Woman, Whitney Houston covers that song and she says the last lines are Shaka Khan. I mean, come on. she loves her, and it was one of Whitney's biggest hits.
And I think, with everything being equal, and just going with the assumption that, let's say, the desire for Shaka and LL Cool J is the same. Shaka's older. I mean, Shaka looks fantastic. She can still belt it.
Absolutely.
But she's still older. And that is something that I don't want to see another posthumous induction of somebody that they could have easily put in.
That's why I'm in support of craft work at LL. I hate to say this too, and I wrote this in the blog too. You got to honor the artists and people while they're still alive. You can't just assume, like Chris Cornell, like you could have put him in 6 years before that. No one expected him to pass away.
Right.
And it's like this urgent, like you just don't know when your artists or industry people are going to pass away, and you don't want it to be posthumous. You want them to celebrate it and think to yourselves, okay, this means something. And it's just one of those things where I would rather see someone get inducted than to never get inducted and happen too late. And it's like, that's why I don't know if you know this, but Donna Summer is the whole reason why I got into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, so I always love to tell the story to friends and podcasts, but basically my mom's favorite singer was Donna Summer, right? So like she loves Donna Summer, Diana Ross and Donna Summer. And Donna Summer was nominated 4 times. She passed away right after her 2012, like she didn't get it on the fourth time. She passed away shortly after that. There was this whole outcry about like, she's a great singer and she's not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And even John Landau, who's the Bruce Springsteen's manager and the head of the nominating committee, said that we failed as a voting body. And that kind of got me wondering, like, wait, why is she not in? And then it kind of got me more interested to follow and study and analyze the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So for me, like, and they really have done a poor job in terms of representing especially Black artists and like soul and R&B in the last decade, especially live-in ones. And to me, that was a huge like, what are we doing here, kind of like. And then she got inducted the next year.
Yeah,
and it was sad.
It is. Yeah, the funny thing is too, I mean, I'll actually argue, though, you're right about what you said about the lack of a prominent African-American artists over the last 10 years. Although I do think that the worst artist in there is African-American. Darlene Love should not be in there at all.
Oh, really? I love Darlene. She's so important to, like, she sang on some of the greatest records of all time. And she is like just so terrific. I mean, it's hard because with her, we also have to take into consideration she got screwed over by Phil Spector. So like a lot of the records, like He's a Rebel, it's credited to like say the Crystals, but it's also like that's clearly her voice, and I love her.
That's a valid point. It's just I think her overall body of work is pretty weak compared to some of the people who are out who were not in. But yeah, being screwed over by Phil Spector, really any artist or any record company for that matter.
I mean, Darlene Love was like cleaning like apartments and houses and like up until like the 80s, like for like a long time. And then she had this career resurgence. To me, she's actually one of the best examples of like someone who had like this, like, like, yeah, she's not like at a high level, like say Tina Turner, who like she was my number one prospect. I love Tina, but like Darlene's got a good case, and I love her.
Yeah, I might have to disagree on that one, but that's okay.
That's all good.
Yes.
But yeah, you got three people who are getting into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame 3 times. I mean, the second time too. You have Tina Turner, you have Carole King, and Dave Grohl. So it's kind of unprecedented too, because you don't usually see that many in 1 year,
right?
And 2 of them being women, and frankly, among the most overdue people to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Yeah, and it's true. And like Evan was saying the other night, again, with all due respect to Stevie Nicks, and I love Stevie, but Stevie as the first female to be in the Clyde McPhatter Club just didn't work for me.
Absolutely not. I mean, I like the persona Stevie Nicks more than the actual music. I think she should definitely be inducted. And when I went to the 2019 ceremony, she was the opening act, like the first artist inducted that night, and it was the loudest, like one of the loudest. People of all ages just love Stevie Nicks in that audience. It was amazing, and the impact and power. To me personally, I would have picked Carole King or Tina Turner.
But now they're both in.
It's such a moot point now because now they're both in. But Stevie opened that door to have Tina and Carole and be like, wait a second, they're not inducted?
Right. And that's sort of like the great thing. Who's a lot of your top people that you've wanted in, I know for me too, have gotten in this year. If you were to like actively campaign for just one artist who you think has been overlooked, who would it be?
Personally, and then like professionally, because I did the top 100 prospects project over winter, over a few months. Personally, I think the B-52s are the most overdue for many reasons. That was one of my most read blogs. I think that one of the weirdest things about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame has been how it deals with new wave, but also how it deals with ideas of sexuality and gender. And to me, like they're throwing other new wave artists like Devo on the ballot. And I think that, Devo's great. I love Devo, but the B-52s have at least like 4 or 5 songs that like anyone of all ages knows and loves, like Rock Lobster, Rome, Love Shack, incredible body of work and really critically acclaimed and respected. And they would get in immediately, like that artsy new wave, but like they had like a pop sensibility to them, and they're very subversive. And I wrote a really great piece actually 2 years ago. Oh my God. Wow, time flies, about them and why they should be in the Hall of Fame.
So that would be your top. Okay, interesting.
And then like probably like more critically, like who
Yeah.
would probably be number one, um, you know, because I number one was Tina Turner, and then number three was Kraftwerk.
Mhm.
So I guess number two would have to be the Smiths, but that
Well,
would be really interesting because how would Morrissey play? Do we want Morrissey even anywhere near that? But you can't deny the impact and influence of the Smiths. So it's kind of like it's a tough catch 22 almost.
Morrissey, well, if he shows up, he'll be miserable no matter what he does.
Heaven knows he's miserable now.
That is very, oh God, yeah.
Who's going to want to duck them? And then Johnny Marr and the others, they're going to have lawyers, it's just going to be a hot mess. It's going to happen, but it's just like that, it'll be interesting. But I guess the Smiths by default because of, my list.
As for me, I've really sort of done a 180 on one thing. So it's not necessarily that I think Rage needs to get in, but Evan, again, I'm just gonna bring up something he says a lot, and he's so true. Rage not getting in blocks a lot of the great 90s bands, the alt bands like that are still left. Soundgarden that you mentioned, like with Chris Cornell, because they're not Chris Cornell. So Smashing Pumpkins, Sonic Youth. There's a glut now of these great early 90s alt bands because they generally don't nominate more than one in a year.
Well, I mean, you could argue they do at least two. I think they do two or three, but usually at least two. Absolutely, because even like Dave Matthews gets played on alternative radio.
Wow. Okay.
Oh no, I'm just saying, like if like
I hear what you're saying. I'm not a fan of jam bands, so I never really lumped him into or lumped them in that category. But I could see that.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like strange because like last year you had three because you had Nine Inch Nails, you had Soundgarden, and you technically Dave Matthews is alternative rock. I mean, he's multifaceted because he's on adult contemporary and pop and rock. Yeah. But it's just interesting how they kind of went to the Foo Fighters, and I'm not a huge Foo Fighters fan. I think that they're great in what they do. Wouldn't be the first 90s band I think of, but at the same time, it's just one of those things where now we can move on. Maybe we'll get to the Smashing Pumpkins or other bands of that era that are a little bit more interesting. But the Foo Fighters are fine, though. I don't have any dislike for them. They're just not a band that I personally like,
which is fair.
Like, not a priority. I think that's the issue because I think it's harder personally to make a case against someone being in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame than to be in the Hall of Fame because everyone can make a case for anyone, and most of the time it's pretty valid. It's just the way you persuade someone.
And the only other genre that I wanted to sort of get your take on that we really haven't discussed much is metal. That's sort of like what I grew up mostly as a kid. Metal is not very well represented. I can sort of see why. It's not a genre that a lot of critics like. When we did our prediction show, I said Iron Maiden had 0.0 chance of getting in. There's no way they were going to get in, even less chance they would have shown up, even if they did. So my most wanted actually is the one out of the big three to me that's remaining, which isn't Judas Priest. For me, it's Motorhead.
I like Motorhead the best of those three by a mile because I think they had more of the punk sensibility to their music, and Lemmy is just the ultimate rock star. I mean, it's amazing to think. At least this year, I will say though, last year they did stack metal and hard rock almost too much that it almost blocked them all to get in. So like you had Judas Priest, you had Motorhead, you had Soundgarden, Thin Lizzy, and there's probably one more that I can't think of offhand.
I forgot Thin Lizzy was even nominated.
It's weird because they're played on classic rock radio, and that tends to be something that is important in the last like 10 years. Like if you're a classic rocker, you have a really good shot. But it's just interesting how the voters clearly dislike metal. It like on this year, it proves it because Maiden was the only metal act and really the only hard rock act besides the Foo Fighters, really. I mean, because Devo certainly isn't. And
Right.
I guess Rage is too hard rock. So I'll take that back. The only metal band on the list. And they still can't get in, but you got Randy Rhoads inducted this year. So at least there's some representation. And I'm going to be honest, the reason why I think metal struggles in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is, I think, kind of simple. I think it never went mainstream, really. It was very much a cult-like audience that liked metal. So, I mean, you have like the bands that people know, like Judas Priest and Iron Maiden and Motorhead. But beyond that, I think a lot of people would be hard-pressed, like a general music fan, to kind of think of someone. And of course, you can think like Pantera and Slayer and other great metal bands. Mm-hmm. Or Metallica, of course, too. Metallica's inducted. But
But they went mainstream.
Yeah, they did went mainstream. But I think metal, for the most part, just never went mainstream. And it was also parodied so much, like in This Is Spinal Tap. And I think a lot of people took like this kind of excessive nature of metal almost too literally, and I think it almost made it a joke in many ways, which I think a lot of it isn't true. But I get concerned with what they're going to have to do with metal, because it's just like, it's ridiculous that like some of these acts, and I'm going to be blunt, I don't like metal, really. That's very, besides Motorhead, that's probably very few I would probably say I'm fans of, but I would vote for them if I had a ballot, because they're just too important.
It's funny, living in the Caribbean. I live in Barbados specifically, where everything's soca, dancehall, and occasional reggae. I've listened to a lot more metal in the last 2 years, just because every time you go out of the house, that's all I hear is soca. And I just need to go the exact opposite sometimes.
Yeah.
All right, gonna play some Wasp now.
Someone mentioned that earlier in the week. Wow. No, but at least you got Randy Rhoads inducted. And yes. I think we have to credit Tom Morello on that, because Tom Morello has always said that was like on his Mount Rushmore of his most admired and influential guitarist to him personally. He's even writing like a foreword to, I think, like a Randy Rhoads biography that's coming out. Okay. And he's on the nominating committee. So like, you kind of think that has something to do with it, but at least there's some metal at least getting represented, even if it's like not the performance category. I have hope that Maiden will make it in. I don't know what they're going to have to do, though, the nominating committee.
As high as Maiden is, like on the core list that I have, I'm far more passionate about Motorhead and Judas Priest. Motorhead, definitely, even though they're actually the lower of the three on the current ranking, just based on votes that have come in comments, because I attribute that to how I do that, just my personal tastes and what I find that I can listen to now more. I guess I'm just hearing things differently now that I'm in my 40s, my God. And as I listen back to some of the songs in my youth, and what I pick up more from that and the nuances of Motorhead and Judas Priest. Iron Maiden, not so much. I rocked out a lot to Iron Maiden, but I don't know that I necessarily pick up a lot of other interesting things that I did before, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's funny, because I think Motorhead could be the first one of those three to make it in, because they have that widespread appeal. Because if you think about it, they have that punk and metal and hard rock combination to them, so like they're like multifaceted. And I think that's why some of the acts that got in this year, like even the Go-Go's, they have widespread appeal. Like they're new wave, they're pop, they have hard rock and punk. I mean, you have two members of the Germs enter in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame this year, which is kind of like, it's amazing to think, and it's just, I don't know. I think Motorhead might be the first one of those bunched again, but I think they just got to keep trying and try to stack it in such a way that, how they do with Depeche Mode and The Cure. Like they kind of just put one band of that type and you'll get the support from that. I just wish that, and it is the least represented by a mile in the Rock Hall as of right now. So I hope that they figure something out. Even if I'm not personally a fan, I still root for metal as much as anyone else, because it's just staggering that some of the like A-listers aren't even inducted.
Has there been any inductee that you sort of that is a head scratcher? I know you're far more high road than I am.
On a personal level, or
but
I think everyone has a case. I think it's hard to say because some people say like Percy Sledge, but then you're thinking like, well, he was influential like in Southern Soul or in like the South in like the 60s and 70s. If I had to pick one that I guess I'm not a fan of, I guess it's probably like Journey or Bon Jovi or one of those because to me, like they just don't have the substance. I mean, like Journey has a great all-time great singer in Steve Perry, so like they kind of get a pass in that sense. But to me, like Bon Jovi is just one of those bands that at least I'm not like they have good songs, don't get me wrong, but at a Hall of Fame level, I don't know. They were going to get it no matter how I felt about them. But I think everybody that's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame has a case. I mean, it's hard to say because I always think that that's a hard way to look at too, because once you're inducted, that's it. I mean, you can't remove them, or you could, but they're still going to be an inductee no matter how many ways you look at it. And it means something because usually in the first line of any epigraph, it's always going to say like Lloyd Price died last week. Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductee Lloyd Price passed away, and that it still means something to the people.
So I just want to close off with this, sort of moving away from that, but I'm just sort of curious. What is your go-to music now? I suspect you're a bit like me in that it's kind of changes from, I don't know, from day to day, but like for myself personally, I'm on a pre-rock and roll kick of old jump blues.
Like what pre-rock do you like?
Right now,
like what kind of artists? And
right now it's been a lot of Solomon Burke.
Oh, I love Solomon, the king of rock and soul.
Yeah, so like it's just like I'm trying to educate myself on where I find a bit of blind spots, and that's sort of been a big push that I've been doing lately. Dave Bartholomew, others like that.
Oh, absolutely. Like Fats Domino, like absolutely. Those are great artists. I try to I do like an album of the day challenge. So I always try to pick like music that I might have missed. So like I'll or an artist like I've heard of, but not necessarily someone that I seek out their music. So you can listen to an album and then you tweet it out and you say like, oh, like this is Two Door Cinema Club or the what is his name? Lloyd Price, or so like I try to pick like something different every day. Like it's kind of like schizophrenic, but I'm always like more of like an alternative guy, like especially like 80s alternative and 2000s, because that's where I grew up in the 2000s. And I always go back, especially to like the late 70s in the punk era to about the early 90s, up until grunge. That's usually like my favorite era. Like the other day, I just listened to Gang of Four, who's one of my favorite bands. Like a band that I would love to see a nomination for. Will they get one? Probably not, but they're so good. And Entertainment's just one of the best albums. I just listened to it, and it's just.
I did too. 2 weeks ago. Yeah, I'm kind of doing something similar. There's this. You're probably familiar with this. Acclaimedmusic.net.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Okay, so they've compiled the top 3,000 albums based on, I guess, critical magazines from England, Canada, USA. So because we're now in an era where you can listen to them all and not have to buy them, I don't know how any artists make any money anymore.
Yeah, they got to be creative.
Yeah, so like I'm at, what am I at? Like number 217 on the top 3,000.
Oh wow!
Yeah, it's an album by the Birds I've got on right now that I'll probably listen to as I edit this.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Sometimes I find stuff really enjoyable. Sometimes the stuff I've heard, like I used to own the CD, just okay, I'll listen to it again. Sometimes it's like, oh my god, what do the critics see in this? I just don't get it.
Yeah, it's really weird because I think music, like any art or like movies, especially, it's always like context. You're like why did that mean something to someone at that particular moment in time, or what did they miss that they didn't see in it?
Yeah, because I think I started it off the number one song or number one album. I think it's still that way because they'll change it based on other top lists that'll come out. Was Pet Sounds.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So then I try to put myself in that spot in 1965 or 66, I forget which year. How would I have heard that not having heard of anything else like that before.
Mm-hmm.
But it's always fun. But I really enjoyed having you on. I'm sure we'll be doing this again in the near future. And hopefully I'm going to get, Longhair is going to get in. He's going to get in somehow.
Professor Longhair will so get in, and there'll be a parade in New Orleans, a COVID-friendly NOLA parade to celebrate that occasion.
We'll beat that too.
We will. We absolutely will.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Kurt.